As most of you are aware, but I don't think everyone here is, because we have a few different guests today. A few weeks ago, Sarah, myself, and Mirembe, we went to Michigan to visit family. We had a great time. But whenever we visit, I am amazed by the family dynamics. Sarah and I have both been blessed on both sides of the family with some pretty great in-laws. Her family's pretty awesome. My family, well, I don't know, I think maybe I should make her say it, but my family's pretty awesome too. We really don't have in-law issues, which, as I see with my sister, she is dealing with being newlywed, that we've got quite a blessing in that. I know that for many families that can be a very, 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 very big issue. It can be a backbreaker. But my family has embraced Sarah as their own, for better or for worse, which is great. Except that I've noticed that many times, some of them talk to her more than they do to me. Especially my grandpa. My grandpa loves Sarah. I have a great relationship with both my grandpa and my dad. But do you know what happens when I call on the phone? Hi, how's it going? Do you want to talk to your grandma? Do you want to talk to your mom? And just like that, we were instantly, okay, there's mom and grandma. That conversation just doesn't last very long. Granted, in person lasts a little bit longer, but not a whole lot. We joke about this all the time. I tease them about that. My mom and my grandma joke about it a lot. They are big talkers, just not on the phone. Now, there have been a couple times on our drive back from Michigan when Sarah and I are talking, and she shares something that my family had been talking about her with, that I realized I had no clue about that. There's just these givens, these things that every family is supposed to know, right? I think they just assume that because, all families know this, that I automatically know it, even though it was never communicated. And so it's like you're talking to Sarah and telling her all these family past things that I have no clue about. Apparently, this is one of the things I learned, not this past time, but one of the previous ones. Apparently, my grandpa's grandfather, so my great-great-grandfather, immigrated from Germany to the U.S. And they had such a hard time with his last name that he changed it from, my last name is Shuey, from Schewey to Schewe. I'm not really sure how that made it any easier. Nobody can ever get it right unless they know us. But apparently that was their goal. I never knew anything about that until my grandpa sat down with Sarah, told her the story, and she told me it on the way back from Michigan. I think they just assume that I know all this. Although I do have to say that some of the things they've told Sarah, my dad doesn't know. So there's just, I don't know what that connection is, but for some reason they share things with her that they don't share with anybody else. So family dynamics are kind of funny, in a good way. Something similar happened again this time. Only it wasn't about the distant past, it was about something more recent. My dad cries a lot. He can't get through anything that talks about his feelings or personal emotions without breaking down in tears. Which is probably why he doesn't share too often. I think maybe he's more comfortable with sharing with Sarah because maybe there is that distance that he's able to not break down in tears when he shares about it. That is a big B. So he was sharing with her about some of the things that had happened just recently. If most of you are aware, I asked for prayers a while back for my mom. She was having back surgery. It was complicated for many reasons. The surgery was successful, and there were no medical issues that we needed to worry about. But in the home, my mom does everything. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, transporting my 11 and 16-year-old siblings to all their soccer and other activities. They are both homeschooled, and she organizes and does all of that. And so after my mom had the surgery, she couldn't stand up. She couldn't, for a time, she couldn't sit up. She couldn't drive. She couldn't lift. She still, when we were there last time, couldn't lift anything heavier than a gallon of milk. The void was huge. My dad has never been responsible for these kind of things. It isn't that he's lazy or anything like that, but he works 50 to 60 hours a week, and when he came home and would work around the house, he would do things more like yard work, those kind of things. There's only one place I ever remember seeing my dad cook. Whenever we went camping, we'd always have one meal where my dad would cook steak and baked potatoes over the open fire. Other than that, I don't remember my dad ever cooking at home. When I was younger, my mom worked part-time at Joanne Fabrics. And she would have to work an opposite schedule than my dad, so somebody was with the kids, right? And so when she would work evenings, my dad would either order pizza or we'd have ice cream for dinner. No joke. You know, it was one of those don't tell your mom things. And then mom would ask, what'd you guys have for dinner? And dad would be like, oh, you know, we found something. And we'd be like, ice cream! Obviously, this would be quite the task then for my dad. He shared with Sarah that it was, in fact, for him a rather overwhelming experience. There are members of a church in Michigan where I grew up, and it's about a 300 to 400 member church with 5 ministers on staff. Now, that may sound like a lot of ministers, but for that many people, if the church does not embrace its calling to minister to the needs of its members, that includes this congregation too, right? It's not nearly enough. A minister can never be a substitute for discipleship. The role of the minister is to provoke the congregation towards discipleship, not be the disciple for them. Unfortunately for this congregation, that's not necessarily the way things are done. One of the ministers showed up at the hospital after the surgery to visit. It was greatly appreciated by my parents. But that was the last they heard from anyone in their 300 to 400 member congregation. With my mom unable to sit for long periods of time without moving, they had not attended services for more than 2 months. The problem was that they hired one minister to do the ministerial duties of an entire congregation. Even if all 5 ministers did nothing but visit and address the needs of the congregation, it couldn't be done. Where was the church? Now, this might be the first question we ask, and I think it can be an appropriate one, but I think it can also be a short-sighted one. It can be blinding. The church should be expected to be present in the lives of its members, addressing the needs of each other, so that no one may become overcome or overwhelmed. Romans 12:15 says, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Right? We are meant to uphold one another. However, as Sarah and I talked about this as we drove back from Michigan, this is not where our conversation drifted. My parents are not very social people. They will talk to people they run into, but they won't have anyone over to the house. I don't remember the last time they had another family or friends over. My parents really don't have friends they associate with. When they go to church, they arrive when it begins and leave when it ends. They know very few people at church. In fact, you'd probably say that most of the people whose names they know are the ones who are parents of my siblings' friends. Now, I'm not trying to be critical of my parents in any way. This is just the way they are. And there's nothing wrong with that, to a degree. It's not that they're bad because they're not social, but rather that if they want to have a relationship, they have to consciously pursue it and work at it. For them, it takes more work if they wish to establish a relationship. I am not naturally an outgoing person. For me to be outgoing or to go out, I have to think about it. I have to consciously say, you know what, I think I should do that today. I think I should do this or that. And I have to consciously set it aside and force myself to do those kind of things. It doesn't happen naturally. Now, it happens more naturally now than it used to. I've definitely become a lot more outgoing than I used to be. But there are times where that's still something that I have to work through. Some people are outgoing, and it's easy for them. But others are not. I think we can look at our own congregation and say we have outgoing people and we have others who are not, right? We've gone over this many times before. There are many promises that God gives to His people. And these promises are all found to be fulfilled in the church. In fact, it'd probably be safe to say that there is no promise of God that He has given to us in which we cannot find fulfillment in the body of the church, if the church is functioning properly. We always need to preface that, right? Okay. Anything that goes on in our lives, anything that causes us to be stressed, to be overwhelmed, we should be able to turn to the church and find relief from that, shouldn't we? Okay. This should be the case. And I think if we would embrace one another, we would find that that is the case. I think that's something as a congregation that we are gifted in, that we can do very well if we embrace that as a congregation. Remember I said some time back that the church doesn't have a mission, but rather it's that the mission of God has a church. Okay? We were created in order to accomplish a mission, not given a mission because we were created. The church was created to be the answer to the prayers of God's people. We are meant to be the place that brings struggling families to a place of joy and peace despite their circumstances. We are meant to address both physical and spiritual needs of both this congregation and the community around us. Everything we need, okay, this is important, everything that every one of us needs in order to overcome and to not ourselves be overcome can be found right here in the community of this church. And we need to understand that first and foremost. Everything we need to not be overcome, but rather to overcome, can be found right here in the community of the church. The community is God's answer to our prayers. So how many times have you experienced this discussion and watched it spiral into a complaint fest of how much the church, or of how the church or such and such a person did not meet my needs like they were supposed to? I mean, isn't that where it naturally tends to go? I mean, the natural result of sharing this story about my parents and seeing that one person from the church is, oh, well, where was the church when they needed them? Right? I'm not sure that's the direction it should go, though. Too many times it might be the case that the church did not fulfill what they were meant to be. But how often are we the ones to blame because we have not chosen to immerse ourselves in the community? How many times do we not find the answer that we're looking for in community because we aren't a part of community? Don't we have a certain responsibility to put ourselves in a place where our needs can be met? Back to the example of my parents. No one at church knew that my mom was having surgery because they had very few relationships at church, and they didn't tell anyone. They called the church office one day to ask for prayers from the pastoral staff. The church cannot address a need it doesn't know anything about. The church is not some magical place where everyone instantly knows what you are struggling with and how to address it. They cannot expect that person sitting in front of them at church to be there when they become overwhelmed if that person here in front of them has no relationship with them and they don't even know their name. And therefore, that person that sits next to them at church didn't know they were overwhelmed. I think we've probably got a lot of things here today where we could say, there were these times, there is this time, or maybe I am overwhelmed. And we can sit here and nobody sitting around us might know that we're overwhelmed because we've been quiet. We all have expectations of the church and desires for what it should be. We have desire for genuine community. But community doesn't just happen. We can't just show up today and say, okay, I sat in church, therefore we have community. It doesn't magically spawn out of nothingness. Community is intentionally created. Very rarely are we going to step into a group of people and say, I'm overwhelmed. I'm not just going to walk into a room of people that I'm not in close relationship with and say, I'm overwhelmed. I can't do this. Some of us might, some of those outgoing types, but most of us won't. That message that's communicated is communicated in one of two ways. And both involve a previous creation of relationship and community. The only way for us to communicate, I am overwhelmed, and to have that need addressed is one of two ways. Either I have established relationship with a community of believers that is open, my relationship with them is open and honest in such a way that many times my needs are noticed without even having to say a thing. Or I have an established relationship with a community of believers that is open and honest in such a way that I have shared my struggles with them because I'm close to them. Do you notice the common denominator there? Do you notice the one thing that is so very important if we wish to see our prayers and our needs met? An established relationship with a community of believers that is open and honest. Most of us have been here for quite a few years, and we could say we have an established relationship with those here. But I'm not sure that we could always say that the established relationship we have is open and honest. Are we willing and able to share our struggles with those we're sitting next to? Because if not, then we can't expect to find the answer in community that we so desperately need. It is unreasonable to carry expectations of a church community when we won't be open with that church community. No matter how much we would like to say, Jesus doesn't show up and say, that person is suffering with depression, and I got that all backwards here. No matter how much we would like it to be, okay? Jesus just doesn't walk into the room and say, all right, that person is suffering with depression, and that one is worried about their children, and that one, their stove broke, and they have no way to prepare meals until it's prepared. And oh, that one over there, that one doesn't understand why God would allow that thing to happen to them. Okay? It doesn't work that way. This is what makes us, I think, oftentimes, as Fred was talking about, what makes us so uncomfortable talking about the Spirit of God. Because so many times, the expectation that's been given to us is, oh, if we have the Spirit of God is just going to speak up in my head and say, they have that problem, they have that one, and they have those. And then we can address it, right? But how often does it work like that? It doesn't. It doesn't. We like it to, but it doesn't. When it comes to community and your needs being met, we must all accept this one thing. There is a certain amount of responsibility that we bear for ourselves if we desire to see our needs to be met. If we desire to see our needs met, there is a certain amount of responsibility on ourselves to create and develop community. Nobody knows what you're going through. No one understands unless you give them the opportunity to, by being open and honest. There are no family secrets in the community of the church, because the family of the church supersedes any other familial obligation. I'm sure we've heard this before. The water of baptism is thicker than blood. There's no such thing as family secrets in the church if we wish to see the community be there when we need them most. If we wish to be there when others need us most. Now, I am most definitely not saying that the church has not failed. The church screws up quite often. Okay? It's made up of broken people, and broken people break things. Okay? Instead, what I'm trying to say is, has the church failed because it's not been given the opportunity to succeed? Has the church not been able to address the needs in your life and the lives of others you've met or seen or heard of Because it hasn't been given the opportunities to succeed. Back once again to my parents. They had not created community in their home congregation. And therefore, they were not given their home congregation wasn't given the opportunity to succeed. Based on the system in place there, I'm not sure if they would have been given the opportunity, they would have succeeded. It's a bad system they have set up. The church needs to embrace as a community that we address the needs of our congregation. We don't go out and say, okay, I'm going to have you come in and pay you and you're going to do everything for me, right? Jesus says go out and make disciples, not go out and make believers and hire one disciple to do all the work for you. Okay? That the church can never succeed like that. So I'm not sure if it would have succeeded either way. But they weren't given the opportunity to fail. Now, I'm not trying to be critical of my parents, because my parents were not able to create that community in their home congregation, but there are other places where they did create community. My parents, their created community, the one that they interacted with, the one that they loved, the one that they reached out to, well, it reached out back to them. My mom is very active in homeschooling, and there is a Christian homeschool group called Enrich that they are a part of. Every Thursday, they meet and they do schooling, they do gym, they do all kinds of other activities for the entire day. It's all just a bunch of homeschoolers and their parents. This is the place my mom has created community. And guess what? The created community, it responded. The community of the church didn't, because the community of the church didn't know anybody. There was no created community there. But the created community of this Christian homeschool group, which still is the church, mind you, they responded. The weekend of the surgery, there was a lady from this group that came by with trays and trays of prepared dinners that they could just pop in the oven and be ready to go. Even though they weren't part of their congregation, this is still a part of their church community. Last Sunday in our morning Bible class, we read from Psalm chapter 16. I want to draw your attention to a few verses from that passage. If you put them up there for me. Psalm chapter 16, verse 1. In verse 1, David says, "Preserve me, O God, for in you I take refuge." We've all prayed something similar to this before, haven't we? We've all prayed, God, please shelter me. God, please rescue me. God, please protect me. Something along those lines. The words might be different, but the sentiment is the same. God is our refuge. He preserves us through our struggles. But how do we take hold of that refuge? Just because God is a refuge meant for us does not mean that we are living within that refuge. If we're outside those walls, we're not protected by that refuge, are we? Verse 8. I have set the Lord before me because he is at my right hand, I will not be shaken. And verse 11. You make known to me the path of life, in your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. We can only take hold of the refuge of God and all the peace and joy that is promised us if we take him and we place him in our right hands. God isn't a refuge that just chases us around all day and kind of, as we go into places we're not supposed to, goes, okay, I'll cover you now. Right? God is a refuge that we pick up and take with us, that we draw near to. Remember I said that virtually every promise of God can find fulfillment in the community of the church? Where is the presence of God? His body. God said he has poured out his Spirit on his people, on his church. He said, you are the temple of the living God. Not you singular, but you plural. Standing alone, or even a family standing alone, cannot be the temple of the living God. Cannot be the presence of God. It is only when we are part of a church community that we can be a part of the presence of God. And what is found in the presence of God? Well, what happens when God is at our right hand? Well, we find our refuge. To draw near to the refuge, we need to draw near to the community of the church, the place where God dwells. God has promised peace in the trials if we draw near. If God's presence is in the church, then the draw near means to create community with the people who are already living in His presence. And if we are not open and honest, we will not have community. Community is not about how close you sit to one another. If we don't have community, it's not that God's unable, but it's that we place restraints on Him. We cannot experience refuge in Him. And finally, if we don't find refuge, our needs will go unnoticed, unmet, and unaddressed. This is going to sound harsh. Sometimes we need to stop complaining about our circumstances. Stop complaining about how nobody is addressing my needs. And we need to take responsibility for ourselves and go to the place where our needs can be met. We can't expect community to just happen. Instead, we have to draw near to the presence of God and to His people. We have to create community if we want to experience the benefits of community. Now, we want to be careful. In no way am I removing the responsibility from the church or its people. The church must draw people into community and be ever vigilant of the needs around it. Okay? It's not just our responsibility to go to the place where our needs can be met, but it's the church's responsibility to go and say, this is the place where your needs are met. Sometimes we have no clue where our needs can be met in, or how to have our needs met. All we know how to say is they're not being met. The church has a responsibility. This is a given. But the church is made up of people who are limited in both ability and effort. We only can do so much. And even what we can do, well, what do broken people do? They tend to break things. And so even what we can do, we will do imperfectly. We fail every day. Being a disciple of Christ means both addressing the needs of others and allowing our needs to be addressed. I challenge you, we are incapable of addressing someone else's needs if we are unwilling to allow others to address our needs. Oftentimes it will be found that the reason the church has failed to minister to the hurting is because the church is hurting and has not been ministered to. Take responsibility to create and to develop the community that you need by being open and honest, exposed and vulnerable. Spend time together in times of joy when things aren't rough. Establish relationships and draw near to God together. It's a whole lot harder to find what you need when things are already falling apart. But if you've already found what you need before things have fallen apart, there you already have that foundation you can rest upon. And so suddenly something that has the potential to be a backbreaker, it might still hurt. You might still end up hunched over at the end of it, but you'll probably come out of it without the back broken. If a need is unspoken, how can it be prayed for? If no prayer is given, when will the answer come? If no one knows you are suffering, when will you have a shoulder to cry on? if your relationship consists of shallow dialogue for nothing more than an hour each week, then how can anyone know that you have need? Created community provides for those within. Some might be more outgoing than others. For some it might be easier, for others it might be hard. But the responsibility remains the same. No expectation should be had if no opportunity is given through relationships. God is our refuge when we draw near to Him. God has provided us with the refuge that we need. He's provided the answer to every one of our prayers. Here, in this congregation, if we would draw near. If you wish to stand by yourself, forsaking the refuge of God, then go on living in your silence. But don't expect your needs to be met. Not because people are unwilling, but because we're limited. We don't know. Sometimes we're naive too, ignorant. But if you desire to take hold of the promise that God has given for not just survival, but the promise of joy and fulfillment in the middle of our greatest trials, then look to the community around you. Spend time together. Build relationships. Share struggles. Push yourself beyond where you are comfortable. And find the refuge that God has given and intended just for you.